Week 12, CELTA, trainer in training. Here we go. So this week, as promised, it was a little bit more normal than the past 2 weeks, a little bit, because we were supposed to have two input sessions, two sessions on Tuesday, and then non-assessed TPs on Thursday with some informal feedback and assisted lesson planning. Unfortunately, there was a family emergency with one of the tutors, but fortunately, they have an extra pair of hands with me. So last minute, literally, I think it was 30 minutes before it was supposed to start. It was a real emergency. So I had to step in and do a lesson observation. So they weren't able to have the session that they were supposed to have because there wasn't enough time to prepare it, but they were doing the lesson that they were supposed to have was error correction. And so we did lesson observation with a recorded lesson. I gave them a lesson observation sheet that they hadn't used before for their previous observations. And they were sent off. I did it a little bit differently, and I actually think it worked out quite well. So I sent them off into breakout rooms, and they were to go through the observation sheet together and talk, and they had access to the recording, so they were able to pause and play and have conversations in between. So the lesson was broken down into different parts. So I think it worked out a little bit better because it was a little bit more dynamic, that they could work together and have the conversations and pause and play and go back and etc. And the lesson observation sheet had some because they were supposed to be working on, or the input session that was supposed to happen while I was giving them the inputs. The observation session was error correction, so it did have a component of error correction, and we looked at that a little bit. It was better this time around because if you remember a few weeks ago, I did do a lesson observation with them, and they were quite critical. However, this time they were still critical, looking at things with a critical eye, I should say, a little less criticism than just like more of a critical eye, and were much better because I forced them to say if it's something is inappropriate or wrong or not effective, what was the evidence of it not being effective, and then also what would be your recommendation. So it worked out a little bit better. So that was like an hour and a half. They were doing that because I broke the session down into, I think, two or three major segments. Yeah, and they went through and discussed it. So it was overall it was good. Unfortunately, it wasn't. I mean, it was planned because I had the materials and everything was all set, but it wasn't planned because it wasn't on the schedule because there was a family emergency. But the second session went as planned, and the second session was on TTT and TBL. So TTT is not teacher talking time. When we're talking about frameworks, it is test, teach, test, and TBL, task-based learning. Okay, so the tutor started out with a ECDB with a pencil and wanted to use that to contrast with TTT and TBL because as opposed to an ECDB way of introducing language, which is typically quick and fast, and it's a way of explaining something and introducing language very, very quick. TTT and TBL are typically frameworks that we use that take a little bit longer because they go more in, I don't want to say more in depth, that it takes longer to introduce the language. So ECDB is a technique. I'll let you Google it if you're not familiar. I'm not going to get into it because the first part of the session was to then revise PPP, go through the stages, the typical stages that we see, and then introduce the rationale behind using that framework. He then elicited advantages of using PPP and some constraints of using it. And then he set up a task for teachers to research TTT and TBL. They had to gather information and do the same analysis that they did together, like they had just finished with, as a whole group for PPP. So they needed to introduce some rationale behind it, why people use it, advantages and some disadvantages. There was confusion, misconceptions about both of the approaches, and he definitely had to go back to the main room and give more in-depth explanations, clearing up doubts, et cetera, et cetera. And then, so once that was all clarified and it was okay, then he tasked them to create a skeleton for the TTT and TBL frameworks using course books available for the teaching practice. So they have resources for their teaching practice and to use those. And it was interesting because the session ended with teachers reflecting on, was the session more akin to PPP, TTT, or TBL? And they're encouraged to share their ideas why. And it was interesting for them to realize that it was a little bit of TTT and a little bit of TBL at the end. So he definitely was testing them and then had to do some serious clarification when there were some misconceptions, and then gave them a task, and then they, so feedback on the task. Anyways, it was interesting to see. It was interesting to see that the frameworks that he was had to include in the input session influenced the stages of his teacher training. So interesting way of looking at it. So that was Tuesday. So that was the input sessions. And then on Thursday, we had 2 non-assessed TPs. And and then I taught. So because they had already done interviews with the students. So yes, so there was 2 teachers that taught. Their lessons were fine. I thought they went well. I watched them. However, I had a personal issue on Thursday, so the teachers taught the 2 lessons. One was a listening and the other one was a speaking. I thought they did pretty well. And I worked with them the week previous, helping them stage their lessons out. And I thought they're really getting the hang of it. So I enjoyed watching them. And then afterwards I did a writing lesson. And then I had to leave, so I didn't hear any of the feedback. So, but yeah, so that's how that went. I didn't get to participate in the informal feedback or the lesson planning afterwards because unfortunately I had a personal issue I needed to resolve. So that's it. I don't have a lot of feedback about the teaching practice, unfortunately. And then I'll be back with next week 13 already. My goodness, so it's flying by. Next week is week 13, and we only have 18 weeks total. So we've got another 6 weeks, and coming to the end of this journey. So hopefully it's been helpful for anybody thinking about getting into training. I know that it's been quite interesting and quite different from my previous expectations. Oh, I can say though that this week I have been working on my my checklist. I don't know if anybody remembers from way back from the beginning. I have this huge document, this huge checklist that I have to go through, and I have tasks. I think I have, gosh, maybe 14 tasks to do. And right now, currently, I am on page 102 of my portfolio. And I have quite a few things that are done. They just have to be added to the sections. So it's quite a bit of work on the trainer and training side. I'm not complaining. I think it's been quite reflective. But yes, I've been trying to work on that as well. So we're at 102 pages so far. We'll see how it goes in the next few weeks. All right, that's it for today. I'll see you guys next week with more CELTA Trainer and Training.